We're taking a look back at the biggest political turning points, trends, and controversies as we hit rewind on Rising. We've got the power players, scandals, and outrageous decisions that have defined our conversations. Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a great show for you today. It is Thursday, I believe.
That's last time I checked, it is, yes.
Keeping track of the calendar appropriately. How are you doing, Niall?
I'm fine, Robbie. My week is going reasonably well overall, I would say. Nice. And yourself?
I just got my Nintendo Switch 2
Exciting
arrived
news.
in the mail, and I spent most of last night, setting it up, downloading the data from the old Switch to the new one, so I didn't get to play very much. Got to play a little bit of Donkey Kong. Very enjoyable. But I've got a train ride to New York and back today that I'm going to be playing the Switch the entire time.
Big day.
Big day.
Excellent. Well, let's get back, I guess, to news of a more serious variety. What is on your radar today?
Just a little bit more serious. Kamala Harris not interested in running for governor of California in 2026. Maybe she just wants to play the Switch 2 all day. The former vice president announced this news yesterday. I'm not actually surprised by it at all. In fact, I think the ex-Veep has her eyes set on a loftier prize, President of the United States. Yes, that's right. I fully expect that Kamala will make another run for the White House in 2028. But right now, she's playing coy. Multiple media outlets reported on Wednesday that after returning from a trip abroad, Harris decided to stay out of the race to succeed Governor Gavin Newsom, himself a likely 2028 contender. For now, my leadership in public service will not be in elected office. I look forward to getting back out and listening to the American people, helping elect Democrats across the nation who will fight fearlessly, and sharing more details in the months ahead about my own plans. The key phrase there is obviously for now. Now, honestly, Kamala is making the right call for her. Why on earth would the former vice president want to be a lowly governor? It's never made any sense to me. For one thing, being governor of a state requires a lot more work than being vice president, a job that actually has very few requirements per the Constitution. Running California, by contrast, means running a state that contains the world's fourth largest economy, dealing directly with tech regulation, the impact of immigration, mass transit issues, housing shortages, crime, forest fires, other issues. Is Kamala cut out for that? Far from convinced. But make no mistake, she does want to be the president. And Kamala's perspective is that last time around in 2024, she was never really allowed to run her race. Since Joe Biden dropped out at the literal last minute, she didn't have time to hire and recruit campaign staff who actually believed in her. She didn't have time to plan and execute a strategy. She didn't have time to convince the American people that she was sufficiently different from Biden, though to be fair, when given the opportunity to distance herself from the unpopular incumbent, she punted. Remember this moment on The View?
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
That was the end of that campaign. I mean, points for loyalty, I guess, but the answer crucified her with swing voters. People did not like the Biden administration and they wanted a change. At no point did Kamala Harris indicate she was going to give it to them. But maybe next time will be the charm. Second time? Third time, actually. If Kamala runs in 2028, it will actually be the third attempt she's made at the presidency. Now, her 2019 campaign, and it's a 2019 campaign because she didn't even make it to 2020, never got off the ground. She dropped out when faced with bad polling in the California primary that had her likely to come in behind even Andrew Yang. Kamala Harris is not someone who has experienced a tremendous amount of success on her own as a national political candidate, yet Biden chose her as his designated successor. And so she would enter the 2028 race with a certain amount of establishment and elite support, also name recognition, even though I don't think there's really some grassroots movement clamoring for her. We've also learned that she's not terrific at long-form interviews, which, if 2024 is any indication, could be a dominant means of introducing candidates to the American people by the time the next election rolls around. Now, I have a feeling that the ascendancy of 3-hour podcasts is not going to be contested anytime soon. A successful presidential candidate is going to need to be able to sit down with Joe Rogan and Andrew Schultz and whoever else for hours and make a favorable impression. Look, love him or hate him, Gavin Newsom has proven he can do that. Pete Buttigieg has proven he can do it. Has Kamala Harris demonstrated that skill? I'm not so sure. Nevertheless, another failed Democratic presidential candidate is wishing Kamala well. Reacting to the news, Hillary Clinton wrote on X, "From prosecutor to senator to vice president, Kamala Harris has always been for the people. I know her next chapter will be no different, whatever shape it takes. Girls get it done, Niall. Look at them. Look at them getting it done.
Glad you paid tribute to Hillary Clinton, paying tribute to Kamala Harris
Yes,
there.
that's what our show, it's commentary on reaction to commentary to reaction things.
I could feel the sincerity in your voice as you read out the Hillary
Overflowing.
Clinton. Look.
I'm untethered from what has been.
Well, indeed, and what might be.
And what might be.
For that matter.
Yes.
So what isn't going to be is Kamala Harris as governor of California. I think she made the right decision.
Of course. Why would she do that?
Right.
Why? I didn't want it for her. I was exhausted at the prospect of this happening to her.
Right. And to my mind, the other point is the risk-reward calculation doesn't work at all, right? If she runs for governor of California and wins, people say, well, of course she should have won. She was the sitting vice president and the Democratic nominee. If she runs for governor of California and loses, that's like literally end of political career.
Although Richard Nixon came back from the exact same situation.
Richard Nixon did, and Richard Nixon is the only person in modern history, at least, or well, relatively modern history, who has come back from losing a presidential election in 1960 to winning again, or winning for the first time in 68. Whether Kamala Harris can replicate that pattern, I am highly skeptical of. Look, on this show I've been critical of President Trump numerous times, but I've never been that persuaded that Kamala Harris is some blinding political talent. As you mentioned, as you termed her 2019 campaign, petered out, having begun with great excitement, big crowd in Oakland, there was a lot of media excitement around her. It never really went anywhere. Yes, her people can make the argument that she was burdened by Biden's unpopularity last year, and I think it was a 107-day campaign. That is, that's short to present yourself as the next president.
I can see why if you're self-deluded, you can think that, well, I could have won if I had time to do it my way. She had to use all of the Biden staff for the campaign, and those people were really awful, as we're learning. And they were so beholden to Biden, they didn't want to criticize him. They wouldn't let her, they were keeping her on a leash that was not favorable to her. But she will still be tarred by association with Biden next time around, is the problem. They're going to be, and this will be a problem for Pete Buttigieg as well, even though he does a good job of talking on podcasts and doing unfriendly media, and it does a lot of things right, I think, in terms of his comms and his impressive in some ways as a political figure, but he was a cabinet secretary, and the questions are going to be, well, why didn't you say anything about Biden? Were you not, you couldn't meet with him? I mean, part of the inability of the cabinet to meet with Biden is a theme of the Jake Tapper book. Not that we'll all necessarily be so obsessed with Biden's age in 2028, but I think him and Kamala they'll be hurt by the association in the same way that Hillary Clinton was hurt by the Iraq War vote when she was up against someone, Barack Obama, who hadn't had to take that vote. Kamala and Pete will be up against, Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer and other governors, people who don't have to own anything Biden did.
Yeah, I guess I would differ somewhat in what you think is going to be the salience of that issue in 2028. I mean, I'm just not persuaded that that topic will be quite as dominant as it is now. The Iraq War was still, still going on and still very much part of the picture. The other thing, just finally, is I'm not entirely convinced she will run. I think she's extremely ambitious, and I think she'll think about it.
Think she can't help herself?
Well, I don't know.
They never can. They never can.
If it looks like she's going to lose, I don't know if she'll really get in, but we shall see.
We shall see. My prediction is she does, but why am I making predictions? I don't. It always comes out wrong.
It's always entertaining. It's always entertaining. That's why.
All right. Democrats are reaching deep into their bag of tricks to force the Trump administration to release the Epstein files. We'll talk about it after this.
Is it a bird? Is it a plane? Surprise! It's new limited edition MAGA merch. President Trump has launched a Trump 2028 hat, which boasts it is made in America. A subtle dig, of course, at the president's current trade war with China. He's also launching a Trump 2028 shirt, which says, quote, rewrite the rules.
The new merch comes weeks after the president told NBC News that he is not joking about the possibility of running for a third term, though that would be prohibited under the Constitution. Despite that, Trump has said, quote, there are methods, unquote, that could make a third Trump term possible.
The item's descriptions do not explicitly state if Trump will actually be pursuing another term. The hat listing says, "The future looks bright. Rewrite the rules with the Trump 2028 high crown hat." The new merch has taken social media by storm. The president's son, Eric Trump, posted an Instagram story wearing the hat. And Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene posted on X, "Nice hat, Eric Trump."
Other users are slamming Trump. Political commentator Ed Krasenstein writes, "Trump wants to be Putin so bad he doesn't plan to leave office. If you can't see that now, you're either blind or you simply don't care." Amber, I think here we will probably disagree, but I think that maybe there may be a measure of common ground in the idea that I do find the merch essentially trolling. I don't find the joke particularly funny, but I get the idea that it is meant to inflame outrage and to have Liberals say the kind of thing that Mr. Krasenstein said there. So that, I mean, I don't get, I suppose, overly in a lather about the selling of the hats. But I do think that Trump is not joking, because that's literally what he said, about the idea of a third term. It is prohibited under the Constitution, but I don't think that he frankly particularly cares about that, and I take him at his word that he is at least looking at that possibility. And the concern, I think, is that he is prone sometimes to making outlandish statements, or purportedly outlandish statements, and his supporters say, "Oh, he's only kidding," or "he's trolling." And in fact, it's a way of getting previously taboo or outrageous ideas into the sort of bloodstream of political debate, and then often it transpires that he is not, in fact, joking. But what do you think?
I agree with you that it's 100% a troll job. He's obviously messing with the media and the Democrats with this hat. It's also going to make him a ton of money for future campaigns for Republicans. Obviously, any money that he raises through the Trump committees can be used by giving it to the RNC or to other campaigns, or even donating it to charity. So I think that's part of this too, is sort of taking something that is getting a lot of media coverage and being able to fundraise off of it. But look, this is a distraction for the media. Right now, we just talked about the poll numbers for Trump not looking great, specifically on the economy, which is a top issue for voters ahead of the midterms. This is a really convenient way to get people talking about something that the apoplectic reactions from the left will make people turn their attention to perhaps the overreaction as opposed to legitimate criticisms of Trump administration policy. And if you go back to the first term, he did something very similar strategy. On the same day that Trump fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he also revoked the hard pass credential of CNN's Jim Acosta. Predictably, the revocation of the hard pass got way more coverage than the firing of Jeff Sessions. So I think when Trump does things like this, you have to look at, okay, well, what is it that he's trying to turn the media's attention away from? He likes to sort of do the laser pointer with the cat strategy, where he puts the laser up on the wall and watches the media chase after it while he's busy doing something else.
So I agree that that is a strategy that he frequently uses. Where I disagree, I think, is that a president suggesting that he might or would seek a third term is in fact deserving of apoplexy, because it is so blatantly unconstitutional and because of Trump's history about 2020 and all of that. So if any president, whether it would be Joe Biden or President Obama or any Democrat or Republican, is invoking the idea of running for a third term, that does require coverage, and it requires coverage that notes that it is blatantly unconstitutional to do that. Now, whether it is a distraction or not, it's sort of so fundamental to the way the American Constitution has been set up ever since FDR that it absolutely requires some sort of serious coverage in reaction to it. Now, to be clear, I'm talking about Trump's overall comments on this topic. The hat, I'm more aligned with you on. I think that's just an obvious stirring of outrage.
I think another important thing to understand about Trump is that when people ask him if he will rule something out, that is an automatic way to get him to say the opposite. This has happened time and time again. People say, will you rule out X? Will you rule out Y? And he'd be like, well, we're looking at it. We'll see. I don't know yet. And that's just sort of his classic reaction, because he doesn't like to be pinned down by questions from the media. So that's how I view his response to Kirsten Welker when they first had that interview about potentially having a third term. And I don't think it's entirely fair to compare what happened in 2020 to this. It is obviously unconstitutional, which is why I think it's so absurd to take it too seriously. Because when you look at 2020, what Trump ultimately did, separate from the riot at the Capitol, which obviously his supporters were wrong for doing, him specifically challenged legitimately the election results through the court process. And when the legal process didn't turn out in his favor, he left office, right? And there have been numerous Democratic elected officials and candidates who have done the exact same thing, whether it was Jill Stein asking for a recount in 2016, Stacey Abrams refusing to cede the governor's race in Georgia, Hillary Clinton even calling the election results illegitimate in 2016, claiming that Trump had basically gotten into office because he had enlisted the help of the Russians through the so-called Russian collusion scheme. So that to me is a really separate thing, 2020, what Trump and his team did in that election, fundamentally very different from the Trump 2028 hats.
I don't think there's any issue on which you and I disagree so adamantly as 2020 and January the 6th, because I don't really agree with anything that you've just said. I think that Trump instigated and revved up his supporters, fight like hell, otherwise you won't have a country. Before that, calling the Secretary of State in Georgia and asking him to find votes that would overcome President Biden's legitimate victory in that election. So I consider that to be an absolutely appalling series of actions by then President Trump, and something that would have absolutely undercut the rule of law in this country and American democracy.
I think we have to leave it there.
We do. Take care. On the next topic, we will have Democratic National Committee Vice Chair David Hogg, who is in more hot water with his own party, coming up next.
Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Monday. We've got a great show for you today. I am again joined by my friend Bofta. Nice to see you.
Hey, good to be here.
How was your weekend?
It was awesome. I mean, the weather was awesome. Of course, we had the Easter egg hunt, so we just had a lot of fun. It was a good Easter weekend. So it was a busy one though. And if you were around the DC area this morning, you were lucky because there wasn't much traffic. A lot of folks off. So that's
true.
good.
That was nice.
Yeah. So we've been following so much of the news that has been happening over the weekend. What's on your radar?
Happy to tell you. Let's get to it. Is the Democratic Party about to be taken over by AOC? And would that be a good thing for Democratic chances if it is what happened? Let's discuss. First of all, it's worth asking, who is actually in charge of the Democratic Party right now? That's a question on the minds of millions of people. On one hand, the Democratic base is finally somewhat fired up to work against the Trump administration. Even I can admit that. Now that Trump is taking a bunch of actions that Democrats stridently oppose, like carrying out the widespread deportations of illegal immigrants at any cost. We've begun to see some protests all over the country. Not very effective protests, mind you, with small-ish numbers of mostly older Americans waving signs and chanting cringe slogans about how much they don't like Elon Musk, etc. But hey, at least they're doing something. What is the leadership of the Democratic Party doing? Very little. In fact, DNC Vice Chair David Hogg, who's apparently being hailed by the party as some expert on the youth vote, even though he has no qualifications whatsoever besides being kind of a youngster himself, has actually vowed to spend $20 million to primary members of his own party. Hogg said, "We have a culture of seniority politics that has created a litmus test of who deserves to be here. We need people, regardless of their age, that are here to fight." Now, this might shock you, but I actually kind of agree with Hogg on this. Democratic leadership is excessively, self-defeatingly obsessed with seniority. Wait your turn, even if you're in your late 70s by the time your turn comes around. Meanwhile, Republicans have jettisoned all those old guardrails. Doesn't matter if you're old or young, doesn't matter if you've been in government for decades or just got interested in politics 5 seconds ago. Doesn't even matter if you're a Republican. If Trump likes you and the MAGA base likes you, congratulations, you're in. The Democrats are like the opposite of that. It doesn't matter if the base likes you. It doesn't matter if you're broadly popular. The party hates bold, out-of-the-box thinking. It loves conformity and waiting your turn and being as procedural as possible. That's in terms of its political strategy, not its politics. I absolutely think the Democratic Party does want to implement all sorts of, in my view, absolutely radical policies. It just doesn't want to do that in ways that are as obvious as the Republican Party. When Trump wants, for instance, Harvard to fall in line, well, he threatens the institution directly on social media. When the Obama administration wanted Harvard to fall in line, they had their administrative agencies quietly craft guidance using a 50-year-old statute and send it to all the colleges. It was similarly effective, but a lot more subtle. Trump has no subtlety, for better or worse, so all the radicalism of what he wants to do is self-apparent. The radical nature of the Democratic agenda, on the other hand, is very much kept under wraps. But I digress. There are radicals in the Democratic Party, in my view. Two of them, in fact, Bernie Sanders and AOC, who are currently taking part in this oligarchy tour across the country. They even went to the music festival Coachella, a favorite destination of affluent young people, speaking in opposition to Trump and to Elon, the aforementioned oligarchs. Now, to Bernie's credit, he and AOC do draw crowds. Sanders is clearly nearing retirement age and will likely not run for president again. AOC, however, well, she might very well run in 2028. In fact, my favorite pollster, Nate Silver, thinks AOC may be the single most likely Democratic presidential nominee for 2028. Good idea? Bad idea? Let's listen to what Bill Maher had to say about it this weekend.
It's not about the big crowds that come out to you when you're talking in a festival or wherever they are. I think it's because I think Bernie showed up at Coachella. That must have been fun for the fans. It's who shows up on Election Day. And I just don't see that's the ticket. I mean, Cory Booker, I know you've worked with him. I like Cory a lot from my home state of New Jersey. Made a speech for 25 hours. Again, just whacking each other off. This is just not what's going to get the job done.
So not a favorable verdict. Like Bill Maher, I don't at all care for AOC's Democratic Socialist policies, and I expect that her agenda, which would give massive power to the federal government and to regulatory agencies in a misguided effort to empower bureaucrats to equalize society, would trigger a massive conservative backlash. You'd have half the country, maybe more, praying Trump could serve a third term. But I will say this, the right underestimates AOC to their peril. She is a formidable salesperson, and she's proving that all over the country right now. I'll be making this warning now until Election Day. Just because her ideas seem ludicrous and dangerous to us, to libertarians, NatCons, MAGA, the GOP, the Trump administration, etc., the right broadly, that does not mean she will be easy to beat. She has personality, she's got spunk. It's time to start reminding the voters that the choice isn't necessarily between the MAGA agenda and some kind of inoffensive, bland centrism represented by the Democratic Party. The choice is going to be between MAGA and socialism, at least if AOC gets her way. We shall see. So this caused a bit of a stir a couple days ago. Nate Silver, who's a pretty respected analyzer of the data, says he thinks, not that she's like 50% plus, but that she's got 20% chance and everybody else has less chance of being the nominee. I think that's going to wake up some people on the right end, maybe in the Democratic circles.
Well, here's why I agree with you. I think you can't underestimate AOC. Remember the first time that she ran for office, if everyone remembers, she beat out a Democratic incumbent. And she did it by really getting in touch with the people and the pulse. And she ran for as she calls it, like a working class champion, right? So we know that AOC has a lot of power, and she's got her pulse on something that the Democratic Party as a whole does not. So, a lot of people are resonating with her message. Look at the crowds. And Bill Maher can say, hey, he can make fun of the crowds, but people showing up means something, especially in this day and age. So people coming out, spending their time to, hang out essentially with Bernie Sanders, who they know is in retirement age. And AOC, I think, is saying a lot. And they are energizing the party in a way that the Democratic Party as a whole has not been able to. The other thing that I'll say is that doesn't mean that I necessarily agree that it's going to be easy for somebody like AOC to come in and be a presidential nominee. Let's be honest. Sexism still exists. We saw it with Kamala Harris. We also saw that Trump did have, when you compare 2024 and 2020, that he nearly doubled his share of young black men, and that there was a large amount of Hispanic voters who did come out to support him. Again, comparing 2024 to 2020, there was a wider number. And so this is different in that if AOC is running, not only she's the first Latina woman, youngest Latina woman to be in Congress, but also, you have to keep in mind that there's a ton of sexism that still exists in our country, even if you take race out of the picture.
I think it will be hard for her. I'm not sure it will be hard for those reasons, for the identity-based reasons. I think it'll be hard because she will have the structural opposition from the Democratic Party.
That too.
In the same way that Bernie versus Hillary faced just tremendous amount of difficulty because there was so much institutionally on Hillary's side. And I think AOC will be up against some of that, but the party has weakened substantially. There isn't someone as obvious a inheritor of the Democratic brand at the institutional level as Hillary was in 2016, or maybe, Kamala was this time around because they literally made her the nominee without an actual vote or anything of that nature. So in a crowded field, it could be a Trump 2016 situation where there's a million people running and the guy with the highest, gal in this case, with the highest name recognition is going to have an advantage because it's so diffuse. Who the establishment or the institution wants to support could be spread out amongst a bunch of candidates.
That brings us to Stephen A. Smith puts his name in, right? So you've got this celebrity, just like, Trump back in 2015. He was polling at one point, I believe, in Texas for the Republican nomination at 2%. Nobody was taking him seriously. Stephen A. Smith recently, according to another poll, 2%. So I think we don't know. It's a toss-up to your point. It's going to be interesting to see in the next couple of years, I think, who steps up and who starts winning the messaging game, because that's what this is about.
We don't know, but we'll be speculating like wild every day between now and 2028.
Like wild.
Just for fun, and also because that's our jobs.
Yeah.
Up next, Singlegate scandal is far from over. In fact, it's heating up. Pete Hegseth is back in the hot seat, and we'll tell you why.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is gaining some traction among Democrats, bringing a prospective 2028 presidential run into sharper focus.
Now, Democratic operatives, donors, and lawmakers have reportedly become obsessed, that's a quote, with Newsom's constant trolling of President Trump. Democratic strategist Jamal Simmons told The Hill that people outside the political sphere, quote, ask me two questions. Do you think he can win? And do you think he can be the guy? No one has ever asked me a single policy question about him. Now, Simmons continued, quote, a lot of Democrats think this might be the time for a more traditional choice, and Newsom fits the bill. They just want a winner. They have this mindset of let's just win and we'll sort out the politics later. Democratic strategist Basil Smikle echoed Simmons, calling the governor's social media trolling provocative and saying the governor's strategy, quote, matches the president's own style, and I don't think there were a lot of prominent Democrats who were good at that, and I think it has made a difference. It has elevated him in a way that shows some deftness and thoughtfulness about his politics, and voters want a fighter.
But is Newsom's strategy sustainable through the 2028 election? Susan Del Percio, a Republican strategist who doesn't support Trump, says she doesn't think so. She told The Hill that attention around Newsom, quote, doesn't buy him much, it just buys him a lot of goodwill for today. Right now, it just looks like he's got this one act. It's a good act too, don't get me wrong. It just won't get him to where he needs to go as a presidential candidate.
Well, eventually he's going to have to start talking policy if he really wants to get, but he's not there yet, right? We're not at a point where we're debating or he's actually put his name in the hat. So right now he can just play the game. And I think the part of the game is gaining your national attention. A lot of people knew who Gavin Newsom was. Some people didn't, especially the everyday voter that doesn't engage with California often and not into politics every single day. And I think what he's doing is just showing people, and I think he's a smart guy. He's getting out there, doing podcasts, engaging with young men and young media, just doing things to first say, hi, this is who I am. People criticize Kamala for not doing that. And then hopefully next he talks about policy. What a lot of Democrats said is that they wanted a bold, a clear alternative, somebody with a backbone to stand up to President Trump, and somebody who just wasn't afraid to kind of just do whatever they're going to do. I think that the problem was, what is it that we're going to do? The Democrats didn't have a solid message since Kamala lost, which to me is extremely disappointing. But I think Gavin Newsom just being able to fight fire with fire. I don't agree with redistricting, but I do agree that at least he's asking the people of California if they'd like to do it in a vote. He's just trying to say he wants to balance the scales a little bit with what's going on in Texas. He's doing something. And I think Democrats were tired of sitting back and feeling like they're just getting steamrolled. And Gavin Newsom, to me, is hilarious. I know, Robbie, I don't think you think he's that funny, but I think it's hilarious. I mean, he's putting himself on the Time cover. If Trump says something about the way he moves his hands, he zooms in on Trump's hand like, what? People are saying you could possibly pass away because of your ailments, like on your hand, but you're talking about my hands. Like, I think he has a response in real time. And to me, that's what we've been seeing from the highest leader in our country for the last few years, but President Trump when he was in office, out of office, and now back in office. So it's refreshing to see somebody just do the same thing. And that doesn't have to be every Democrat, just like every Republican is not as abrasive as Trump. But I think it's refreshing to see a Democrat doing this also.
Yeah, I guess the reason it doesn't work for me is that Trump's communication style comes across as very authentic and because it was such a unique way for a politician to talk and for them to use social media, that when Gavin Newsom just sort of copies the style or tries to mock it, I don't know. It doesn't read for me, but maybe it's different for Democrats. I do agree with you that the podcast circuit was a good idea, and it allowed him the opportunity to move away from some of the more unpopular progressive social positions that he's taken over the years and sort of workshop those talking points before he gets into a debate and maybe try to do a little bit of revisionist history. We saw him saying some different things about social issues on the first few episodes of his podcast.
People are allowed to evolve. People are allowed to.
They are, but I mean, I think they should probably explain how they got to that point and why their positions changed so radically as an adult who's been in politics for a long time, which was one of Kamala Harris's problems. But all of that being said, I do think he's made quite a few missteps in the past few weeks. One of those was attacking prayer in response to the Minneapolis shooting, stealing a line from Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey saying that, well, the kids were praying when they were shot, so why are you talking about prayer? I think it's hugely offensive and tone deaf for the millions of Christian Americans, right, who rely on prayer to get them through difficult times. Also, just completely ignorant. Like, who else was praying when he was killed? Oh yeah, Jesus Christ. I mean, get over yourself.
Oh my gosh.
He also was going after the former reality TV star Spencer Pratt for criticizing his response to the Palisades fires, calling him a C-list celebrity and accusing him of spreading misinformation. And he's someone who had his house burned down in the fires, him and his family members. And so I just think that he is perhaps picking the wrong targets to go after, like going after faithful Americans in the aftermath of a tragic shooting, and then someone who had their house burned down in a fire that was arguably caused by your policy decisions is not a good look.
Well, I mean, so if he's mirroring Trump's policies, Trump also has plenty of times where it's not a good look at the people he's going after. Most recently, when he's calling it a Democratic host, when there's Epstein survivors and women telling about their experiences on the steps of the Capitol Hill, and in the same breath, he's saying this is a hoax. So I think there can be missteps, right? And we can call them out for Trump and for Newsom. So I will say that. But also, I think, the numbers are on Newsom's side. So Harry Enton, who's CNN pollster, he said that the X account for the press office of Newsom has gone up 450% in followers. That, to me, shows effectiveness. Social media is one of the most effective ways to communicate today. Google searches for Newsom are up 1,300% since June 1st, which is huge, and then 500% since August 1st. So those are the kind of things that you don't see without real traction or who's following you or what's going on, because social media is currency now. And so I think as he continues to polish and build what his brand is, what I'm looking for is serious policies coming out of how you lead, because how you lead a state should not be how you lead the country. Even if you are a Democrat or a Republican, I think you should consider that you're leading all constituents, and you should make sure that you're federalizing some of your policies, but also not federalizing the ones that don't make sense for the country as a whole. And so I think if he's going to really embrace an open mind, the Republicans and anybody who could potentially see somebody being their next president should be happy that he is opening his mind to what you're calling revisionist history, but perhaps just thinking of new ways to lead an entire country that has seen largely that bureaucracy and some of the historical ways that both parties have led don't work for them, which is why President Trump is even in office right now, I would argue.
Yeah, and the question will be, one, do people want someone who ran a state that has seen a mass exodus of people going to places like Texas and Florida, making policy on behalf of the country? And if he is changing policy positions, do people believe that he's actually going to adhere to those when he gets into office, or is that merely for the benefit of the campaign trail? I wonder what you make of the Republican strategist point that we read in the intro, saying that it's still a long ways away from 2028. Do you think he can sustain some of this energy? Because I don't dispute that name ID is obviously hugely important for a presidential election, not least of which for fundraising, but a lot can change in 3 years, right? I mean, we could have completely different political figures coming up on either side of the Democrats or the Republicans. I just don't know if it's sustainable.
This is certainly early on to be talking about the next presidential election, but I do think that President Trump is consistent in, his true social posts, the way that he communicates, his abrasive style. Like you said, that's the reason why a lot of people voted for him. So if people have been tickled by his response, they might come to look for his response, kind of how algorithms work. And you keep going to the same influencer for the same type of content or the same podcast for the same Joe Rogan's going to talk about UFOs probably once a month, So that's what I feel like he may be onto something, but he has to me, he must elaborate to talk about what policies he wants to see outside of, you did this, I'm going to do this. What do you want to put forward? And I think all Democrats must be charged to do that ASAP, because I haven't heard anything that significantly swayed me in any way.
Well, we will see if he can keep up the momentum. Next, the DOJ is reportedly considering some gun control in the wake of last week's shooting at a Minnesota Catholic school. Why liberals are against it, coming up.
Democratic Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett is attracting controversy again after making some remarks that some say lean a bit heavily into identity politics. Speaking on Sirius XM's Urban View Town Hall Friday, Crockett claimed Democrats already made their choice for the 2028 presidential candidate, and she said it's, quote, the safest white boy. She continued saying, quote, I had a donor on the phone with me telling me that all the donors are lining up behind that candidate, so I can tell, and I tell you, it's not a black person nor a woman, okay? In the now viral video that co-host Clay Kane shared, Crockett didn't name names, but dropped a hint that the party has a specific candidate in mind.
Crockett has gotten into hot water recently. If you recall, she referred to wheelchair-bound Texas Governor Greg Abbott as Hot Wheels, for which she was nearly censured. She later claimed her words were twisted. And last year, she traded fiery insults with Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene during a House hearing where they talked about each other's physical appearance.
Social media lit up with reactions. X-account Conservative Brief posted, quote, safest white boy, delusional Democrat Representative Jasmine Crockett brings up race again, this time claiming the party wants to play it safe in 2028. Red State X account posted, quote, oh my, Jasmine Crockett just stepped in it again with comments about who the donors want in 2028. The full Urban View Town Hall will be released on May 15th, which I presume is why we can't play a clip from it, sadly.
Sadly.
My response to this would be like, okay, name names. I'm not going to contradict what you heard from a donor. Who is this safe white boy they're lining up behind? I think if she had just said, the party at its most elite level is risk averse and clearly preferences older establishment figures. It certainly does in terms of congressional leadership. She would have said something that's uncontroversial that I completely agree with, that is actually an attractive thing to say to independent-minded people, how the Democratic Party at its elite level has conspired against interesting, out-of-the-box people. I think by making it a kind of race thing, well, A, it just is, then conservatives are just going to bash the hell out of it, and then it has a ring of falseness to me because, well, Kamala Harris was just she was the choice of, I'm not saying there's something illegitimate about it, but she was the choice of the establishment and the party and the donors and everybody, and she was a black woman. So it's not really about race so much to me, right?
I don't always defend Jasmine Crockett. I think she's prone to saying some kind of pointless or certainly disputable things often. The thing here that I would defend her on, though, is I don't think that what she's saying is really that controversial. As is often the case with her, the way she puts it inflames conservatives and she gets a lot of criticism for it. But, I think her argument is very simply that in the 3 presidential elections post-Barack Obama, Democrats have lost 2 and won 1. And the one that they were victorious in was with an old white guy, i.e. Joe Biden, and Hillary Clinton lost and Kamala Harris lost. And therefore, it seems sort of self-evident that there are Democrats who are nervous about nominating another woman or a person of color, non-white person, whatever term you want to use. And that seems like just obviously the case. I don't think that it necessarily ought to be the case in a perfect world, but don't you think someone like your favorite Gretchen Whitmer, who I am always talking up here, or some of the other female candidates, even AOC, do you not think there is a perception that gender or race in the case of black candidates may hurt people with the general electorate?
No, I think AOC, it'll be that she has much. I'm not even sure with the general electorate. With the Democratic Party, the primary, she's going to get attacked by the establishment for having out-of-the-box views I don't agree with. I don't really think it has to do with her gender. You looked at the most recent 3 elections, but that's leaving off the MVP of the Democratic Party is Barack Obama, a black man who performed spectacularly well in terms of general election appeal. So I think it has to do more with the politics of the person, but, Barack Obama had a kind of moderate style or I mean, he was a very good and effective communicator that both somehow captured progressive aspirations, but was temperamentally moderate in some way that, say what you will about your feelings on his politics, but was successful in terms of winning elections. I think it's more about how the establishment views your politics, rather race and gender being a proxy for that sometimes, but not in all cases. I mean, Bernie Sanders is someone with, I would say, very outside the establishment of the Democratic Party. You might say they're popular beliefs, but that they're not super popular. They're not the things Democratic elites want to run on. But yeah, he's a boring old conventional white guy otherwise, but he's not, and that's the lens you get put in, but it's really not about that. It's about the politics of the person. And I'm not sure where to slot Jasmine Crockett on that, because I'm not as familiar with her politics. I don't know that she's really a full-on AOC type person.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair enough. Look, first of all, I think in relation to President Obama, people even now don't, I think, fully recognize how exceptional a figure he was, and I mean that both in a praising way, but also literally exceptional. That tendency that he had, that you alluded to, where he sort of spoke with the rhetorical flourish of progressives, but is actually quite an incrementalist politician. And certainly, the famous convention speech back in 2004 was all about transcending American divisions and finding common ground. He's actually not politically a very radical figure. So his political skills plus that appeal make him just very, very unusual. In 2008, I remember all sorts of fears about the Bradley effect, which was going back 20 or 30 years before, the idea that white voters would say they would vote for a black candidate and the end would not do so. Obama's election and re-election was a rebuttal to that argument. I do take the point that a Sanders-type figure, people outside the establishment, are treated with suspicion by that establishment. But I also think that Democrats in general are a little bit snake bit by the losses of both Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton, and that translates to a reluctance to nominate a woman again next time around.
Well, and gender and race are different things. There might be more of a gender thing than a race thing.
Possibly.
And it might just be the case. I would not bet against it being a safe white boy candidate. Sure. Josh Shapiro or Gavin Newsom. I think the front runners, to be clear, for the Democratic nomination in 2028 are Kamala Harris herself, if she decides to run, Gavin Newsom, Josh Shapiro, maybe Gretchen Whitmer, and maybe AOC. I think those are the 5 most likely people. There could be some out-of-the-box Stephen A. Smith character, but who knows? But that might just be a side effect that, if Josh Shapiro is the safe pick being alluded to here, it's because he's a popular governor of the must-win state. It doesn't really have anything to do with his race or gender, unless you think those were factors in him becoming elected. But he is popular enough in the state that Democrats have to win.
Sure.
And maybe Democratic elites, and this is not to their... This would be a good decision if they were like, you know what, we figured it out. Okay, we really need to win the Midwest. Let's have a strategy to do that this time.
Yeah.
Would not be bad thinking on their part strategically.
No, I broadly agree with that, but I would say in relation to the relevance or salience of perhaps gender in particular, one of the most fascinating findings from the exit polls this time around, or last November, was that Latino men shifted to an enormous degree toward Trump, and Latina women did not really do so. Now, that seems to me to undercut the argument often made by conservatives or people on the online right. Oh, well, it's a sort of Latinos and Latinas generally prefer Trump's economic policies or something. That to me does at least imply that there was a gender component to that very significant shift among Latino.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. I would not dismiss the gender thing. I think it might be a more salient factor than race,
Possibly.
frankly. But also Kamala's whole branding was, Mamala, that whole kind of thing that was really well liked by SNL and progressives. seems to me like it was off-putting to young men, again, of all racial categories. Not a race thing, possibly a gender-based thing.
Yeah, no, that's not an implausible theory.
Interesting topic. Still ahead, Qatar is pulling out all the stops ahead of President Trump's visit this week, including a highly criticized multi-million-dollar gift, a jumbo jet. We'll talk about it. More Rising right after this.
A new CNN poll shows that for the most part, Americans are happy with how President-elect Trump is handling the transition back into the White House. About 55% of them say that they approve of his handling of the transition so far and say they expect him to do a good job once he is sworn in. Despite that, 3/4 say they would rather Trump prioritize qualifications over loyalty when picking his cabinet. But based on some of the more controversial picks he's made, the president-elect may not agree. It's time to go on the record with Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Scott, as always, it's great to see you. You know, we've been following some of these more controversial cabinet nominations, namely Pete Hegseth for Defense Secretary, and then, of course, Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. Let's get our viewers up to speed here. Where do the nominations stand, and do you think they have a chance at being confirmed?
Yeah, look, in RFK Jr., Kash Patel, there's a few others out there. I think we are probably going to see a few hiccups from some of these. I'm not sure which ones, but a few hiccups once we get to the confirmation hearing process, as the Democrats are gearing up to have some tough hearings, and we'll see, you know, how these folks react under congressional inquiry. But you know, those poll numbers should be supportive and reinforcing of the Trump campaign or the Trump administration, incoming Trump administration. The public likes what they're hearing so far. His approval rating is also up higher post-election, so we'll see if that honeymoon lasts over the next couple months.
Trump, even before he got involved in politics, has always talked about the importance of loyalty. It's something he prioritizes. But you know, how much do you think he's maybe prioritizing that factor of loyalty, maybe over qualifications? We know that Pete Hegseth is, you know, obviously he's a decorated combat veteran, but he's also someone who's very loyal to President Trump, and he doesn't have a ton of experience leading large-scale organizations like the Pentagon. So is there that fear that loyalty is trumping, no pun intended, qualifications here?
That's certainly the argument that Democrats and some of the detractors are making. You know, as you point out, Pete Hegseth is, you know, the incoming nominee for what would, if it were a business, would be the largest business in the world in terms of employees and just size and obviously importance. Look, the Trump administration is going to make the case that these folks, they have some basic skill sets, they have domain knowledge, but more importantly, they're there because they have new ideas and they're not there for the status quo. And that's often where the qualifications come. Someone's been at the DOD for 20 or 30 years. Pete Hegseth has not, and so their argument is that's what they need to bring in some fresh ideas and change it around. And so I think that's why you see a Pete Hegseth, Kash Patel, RFK Jr. You know, they're trying to pick people with outside of the normal qualifications.
Yeah, the term I hear is trying to bring people in to shake things up. So we'll see how that goes. I want to turn to a new AP NORC poll that shows only 22% of Americans approve of President Biden pardoning his son. Over half say they disapprove, but it's still a relatively new poll. Scott, do you expect public opinion at all to shift with time, or do you think this move could potentially taint Democrats' image going into future elections, or is this more of an issue about President Biden's legacy?
I think it's more legacy. I'm going to tell you, I was a little bit surprised to see those numbers. I was expecting numbers that were going to be more along party lines, like it was probably going to be a little bit underwater, but I expect Democratic base to support him, Republicans not, and the independents to kind of shade against him. So I thought I was pretty surprised by those numbers. I don't see them getting a lot better, but you know, usually presidents do better over 20, 30 years. Look at George W. Bush. So we'll see how it goes. But I was surprised to see that.
So in the wake of Hunter Biden's pardon, Trump said he would pardon rioters who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. Scott, how will those potential pardons be received by Americans? I know that Republican senators have said they won't block them.
Yeah, look, the polling on that, and there isn't a lot of it, but what we saw during the campaign was this was very popular among the Republican base. It was not popular among Democrats and not popular among independents. So my expectation is probably not the public to approve it, but certainly not at the disparity we saw under the Hunter Biden part and under Joe Biden. And I think, we haven't heard a lot about it from the incoming Trump administration. They're certainly talking about it a lot less than they were, say, 2 months ago. So we'll see how that actually unfolds.
So I want to turn our direction, turn to a very different story. The shooting of the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson has brought to light a lot of dissatisfaction with the healthcare industry. According to Gallup's annual health and healthcare poll, less than half of Americans, 44%, believe the quality of healthcare in the U.S. is excellent or good, and less than a third of Americans believe their coverage is excellent or good, at just 28%. Do you think this bipartisan outrage toward health insurers will motivate Trump or Congress to take another look at healthcare reform going forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, the United States has an aging population. We're about to see the largest influx of people over the age of 65, which is when healthcare is going to be most critical. Obviously, healthcare costs rise year over year, and it gets more expensive. And we've been talking about the economy for the last 2 years now, and that's what this election was on. And people don't have this much spending power. So I think I look at healthcare as a bipartisan issue, and it's really related to the economy. I would not be surprised to see Congress and Donald Trump to take potentially a populist view on this and really crack down on it a little bit. I don't know that we're going to see, single payer come back up again, but this is healthcare is a bipartisan issue, and I think everyone wants to see it get better.
Yeah, populist, very much a key word. I hear Republicans and Democrats using the term economic populism, so I'm curious to see if that applies to healthcare here. So I want to stay with that same Gallup poll, which also found that nearly 2/3, 62%, said they believe the government's responsibility to ensure everyone is covered. That comes as the approval of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, is nearing an all-time high, 54%. In the meantime, Trump called the ACA, quote, lousy healthcare, quote, in last weekend's interview with Meet the Press. He also said he wants to replace it, but still didn't lay out any plans as to how he would do it, and doubled down on his concepts of a plan. That, obviously very infamous debate response against Kamala Harris. Scott, do you think repealing and replacing Obamacare is feasible? He obviously failed to do it during his first administration, even got some pushback from some Republicans.
Yeah, I'm going to take a kind of pragmatic look at this. I heard what Trump said, and I think he earnestly believes it. But if we look at the legislative calendar over the next 2 years, we've got to they've got to get a budget through. They've got debt ceiling. They've got tax reconciliation. They're going to need something if they want to pursue DOGE. They're going to need some sort of bill, maybe standalone or certainly attached to that. There is a lot of legislative priorities. I'm not sure what the appetite is for a bill that, as you point out, hasn't been written yet. That conceptually these folks want people want something new, but we haven't seen a plan yet from the Republicans. So, I hear what they say. I just don't conceptually see how it's going to happen unless, they get it done in the next 2 or 3 months.
Trump attended the reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris last weekend and met with a number of foreign leaders, Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, French President Emmanuel Macron, and of course, the Prince of Wales, Prince William. How has the reception to Trump ahead of his second term been different than maybe his first term? It seems like a lot of foreign leaders are lining up to meet with him.
Well, I think, this is our second time around, and I think the first time around, everyone was wondering what kind of president he was going to be. And now he's been president for 4 years, so they get a second look at it, and they can readdress it. I think I was only mildly surprised to see Trudeau down there. I was only down in Mar-a-Lago after the tariff discussion. I wasn't super surprised, if you remember Macron when he had Trump in the first administration, rolled out the red carpet and all the fanfare and all that kind of stuff for Bastille Day. So I'm not super surprised on this. Everyone knows that Donald Trump likes the attention and likes the respect shown. And look, Europe, Canada, Mexico, they all need something from the Trump administration over the next 4 years, and so they're going to need to reconnect ties that may have lapsed during the Biden administration.
Lara Trump stepped down as Republican National Committee co-chair this week, which stoked speculation that she could fill Marco Rubio's seat in the Senate. The decision is up to Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, but Scott, what would Lara Trump in the Senate mean for President Trump and his relationship with Senate Republicans? I mean, going back to this nomination process with some of his cabinet picks, we're kind of seeing that Republicans aren't necessarily showing they're going to be a rubber stamp for President-elect Trump.
Yeah, if we look at this, Laura Trump would replace Marco Rubio, who has been a reliable supporter and obviously reliable and loyal enough to get the Secretary of State nod. I think the interesting thing, and you as a native Floridian, is what is the dance going on between Governor Ron DeSantis and the decision here, and what does he may potentially want to do in 2026 and beyond. I think her going to the Senate is likely, but not certain. And I think it only helps Donald Trump, again, have a family member in the Senate and a body that he is going to need some support from over the next couple of years, 2 to 4 years.
Florida, certainly the center of the Republican Party's political universe right now. Let's quickly go out to California out west. We've seen that state's Governor Gavin Newsom position himself as a leader of Democratic resistance to Trump. He has said his state is ready to fight and has called a special state legislature session to enact Trump-proof policies. Scott, is this Newsom setting himself up for 2028?
Absolutely, it's exactly what it is. It's. I don't even know if he's trying to be coy about it. That's not his style. I think California could be one of the flashpoints, depending on how these mass deportations go. Incoming Homeland Security Tom Homan's basically said he's going to use the full force of the government to go after these sanctuary cities. And I think Gavin Newsom is setting up for some pretty explosive public fights, legal fights, and how that's all going to pan out. And it's in a state that shifted right this last election. Obviously, California went Harris's way, but the margin was considerably less than it was under 2020. So we'll see how it all plays out. But Gavin Newsom definitely positioning for 2028.
A lot to watch out for going into 2027 or 2026, 2025, 2028. We'll be looking out for it. Scott Tranter, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.